on, Foxy. It's your birthday. Not for real, just for play. This is Cree Summer, and Moana Nui will be right back.
All right, so we're here with author Ellen Davis. Thank you for taking time out of your busy morning to sit down with us. You have a doctorate.
I do.
In literature, right?
I do, yeah.
How does that impact both your ideal process for your films and what goes into, say, the production side of putting things together, as far as like you shoot something and then you have a change of heart?
Ha ha ha. Change of heart. That's for the rich filmmakers. So I think the biggest thing about having a PhD in English is that I've read a lot. So I know a lot of different stories. I've seen a lot of different stories. I've read all kinds of different writing with all kinds of different structures. So I'm not going to say that makes me a great storyteller, but it shows me the possibilities of storytelling. And I think that I try to bring that to my writing process for both the novels that I write, the prose that I write, and also for my screenwriting. Let me see. How does that impact how I think about shooting? It's actually been really interesting because I have been all of my training is around language and words and interpreting language and words, and a visual vocabulary is an entirely different thing. So one of the things that has been really fascinating for me as I've transitioned, or as I'm moving between the spaces of being a prose writer, novelist, and a filmmaker, screenwriter, is picking up the visual vocabulary, because the picture, as we know, it's worth 1,000 words, right? So I have to when I think about what I want to see on the screen, I'm thinking about the layers of meaning that it needs to convey to be worth the 1,000 words it might take up on a page. So that has to do with both not only just what's being said, but it's also like what's behind the actor as they're saying it. Like, you know, like, so set and all of those other things become all of those other things become really important, because each part of that is compensating for what I don't have as a novelist anymore.
So
well, you know, in that space.
So you started with Shifters was your first series.
Mm-hmm.
Where was the thought process to transition from writing to short films?
Okay, so or
should I say transition?
Well, yeah, I don't want to use the language of transition because I'm still writing novels. Okay. So yeah, so I'm still doing both. One of the things was that as I wrote my Shifters novels, which are about were-panthers, shape-shifting fraternal twins, Nate and Larissa Pantera. Anytime anybody read it, they said, I can see this as a movie. I can see that, you know, it comes alive in my head. You write so that I can see the image. And so that was the thing that first sort of started me thinking about it. But then I started working on film sets and like routinely in 2015. I came back down to Atlanta. I had been gone for work. I came back down to Atlanta and I went. The first one was Sleepy Hollow. But the first big one was Spider-Man Homecoming. And so I decided, this is fun. I'm going to go be on movie sets for sci-fi and fantasy films. That seems like a fun thing to do. But when I got there, the reason I kept going back was because I really liked watching the process of collaborative storytelling. I liked watching people coming together to create a vision of a story, which is very different from the process of being a novelist, which is you sit in your corner, you know, you growl at people if they come towards you while you're trying to write. You know, it's a very solitary process in general. So I love the creative, the collaborative process of filmmaking. And people kept telling me, well, do you want to act? Because I was doing background work. And I was like, I don't really, no. I mean, I would certainly take a role if somebody gave it to me. And I've given myself cameos in my own films because it's fun. But I was actually more drawn to being behind the camera. And I guess that's probably also related to the fact that I'm a writer. So that's kind of like, how I brought screenwriting and directing into my conception of myself as a storyteller. So it's broadened out. So now I'm not just an author, I'm a storyteller broadly with different mediums that I'm operating in.
Okay, so I've seen 2 of your films so far. I know you've done more. Just 2?
Yeah, just the 2.
But you disappear for so many months in between. Like,
I got novels to write, I got short stories to write, I got jobs to work. Lots going on.
So last year's film was, I don't want to say interesting. Last year's film was very poignant, like direct. You could see the message in the visuals. The underground.
Fever Dreams, are we talking about?
Yeah, Secret Dreams.
Fever Dreams, yeah.
And, black women knowing the truth. And that was, poignance probably doesn't do it justice. It's pretty much like right on the nose as far as how direct that was. This one was, this year's film, The Last Days of Chocolate, excuse me. A little bit more subtle as far as the message in the visuals.
Okay.
Subtle in some places, very overt in others.
Felt like it was a hammer, but okay, subtle.
So tonally, how does each story come about as far as like doing one way and doing the other?
Okay, so both films started as short stories, right? And when I was adapting for a screenplay, Fever Dreams was actually one of the first things that I tried my hand at adaptation. Both stories are actually kind of the way that I wrote them on the as short stories. Both films are kind of the way that I wrote them as short stories. So that subtlety, or that sort of more on the nose message that you might see in Fever Dreams was in the story as I wrote it, and maybe the more subtle, the subtlety that you pick up on in The Last Days of Chocolate, again reflects how I wrote it on the page. For The Last Days of Chocolate, the narrator or the main character, the griot, breaks the fourth wall a lot. Played by, let me go ahead and shout her out. Played by the fabulous Nikki Lachey. Breaking the fourth wall. That's how I wrote it in the story. In the story, the narrator speaks directly to the reader multiple times, and I think that there were. Maybe what the subtlety you're talking about is that there are layers of the message for The Last Days of Chocolate. So, it's about consumption of blackness. It's about sort of the ridiculousness at the core of these ideas and these ideologies that we use to bolster oppressive systems and extractive, capitalist systems. But there's a layer on which you can just take it at the most superficial level, which is, a story about what happens when chocolate disappears from the earth. And I'm not going to spoil it for your audience, but so you can take it at that most surface level, but then you start to unpack it a little bit, and that's all on the page. Yeah.
You got anything you want to ask?
One thing I'd like to ask, being that you are a novelist, and I'm not going to say transition, I'm going to say as a novelist you are expanding what you do into filmmaking. When you're writing, I've always noticed that you don't have to be as condensed when you're describing people, areas, arenas, whatever it is you're describing. You've got a lot more room to work with. As you expand into filmmaking, do you find it difficult? And also, what's your process for, all right, I've only got a set number of time and I've got all these things I want to do, but I don't have as much room or freedom as I do with a novel, because a novel could be 150 pages or a novel could be 1,000 pages. Your short film might only be an hour, you might get an hour and a half. How do you make those decisions as to what to cut, what to keep, and just that process for you?
So one of the things that I did find in terms of adaptation, because I do use a lot of description in my writing, is that the dialogue becomes really important. So I had to figure out, for instance, if I have a paragraph of description that I find that's really important in the short story that I'm adapting, and not everything that I've written as a screenplay has been an adaptation, but if I find that there's a paragraph that's really important, I have to look and say, well, how do I get this said? So I can make sure that the ideas of this paragraph are really explicit in the short film or in the film. But not every bit of what I write in a story, if it's an adaptation, has to go into the play. Which does not mean that these are each different kinds of reading audience experiences, right? So when you go to a short story, you go to a longer piece of written work because you want that experience of those rich descriptions and like that depth of that you get with the discussion of the characters, sort of psychological, whatever you have. The screenplay is a little bit more to the point. And so, like I said, a lot of it is just like, okay, so what needs to be said, what has to be conveyed, and how do I get that? How do I reflect that in the script? And then the other piece is some of the first things I wrote. I give them to people, and they're like, "Where's the budget for this? Like, how are you going to do this?" And in fact, for the last Days of Chocolate, I had initially I had a 23-page script that I had to cut down to 15 pages. Oh. And it ended up that we didn't even film 3 because that would have been another $5,000 on top of the budget, at least to shoot that scene in a way that would have done it justice. So that's the other piece. So then you have to say, I don't have that money. So like, okay, so this scene has to be scrapped, but what are we losing if we scrap this scene? And is there a way to pull in some of those other ideas? Now, for the last Days of Chocolate, we didn't pull the ideas of the unshot scene in. We're just like, okay, well, when it gets picked up for distribution and they give us a little more money to flesh it out, then that's when we'll get the scene in there.
Understood.
Yeah.
So what's next? What's coming down the road? Any more previously stored short stories that could be expanded in film form, or?
I mean, I have so many stories, and what I smile because if I say this, now I'm accountable for it. Like the next thing that I will be raising money for, and will be my feature, because short films are a little bit harder to find return on investment for. So it can be, if it's a hobby, it's expensive. And as a writer, if it's between $5,000 plus for a short film, which is actually really, really cost effective, or sitting in my room typing on my computer by myself, eating my $3 snacks, this is what I'm going to, the $3 snacks in my room is what I'm going to choose every time. But with a feature, if you can do it and you can do it well, then you have more possibilities more readily available possibilities for distribution. So that will be the next thing that I fund myself. Now, when and if people come to me and say, "Hey, LaRose, we want you to do this, and here's your budget," I'll be like, I'm all over that. But yeah. So, and then of course I've got other novels and short stories, and I'm always trying to get those kinds of projects out into the world as well. I don't like to name anything because there's nothing that's going to be that is slated to drop at a particular time right now. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Actually, when you're creating your films, how heavily are you involved in the editing process after you've wrapped on shooting?
Okay, so I want to learn more about editing, so I would love to be able to get to the stage where I could do the first rough cut and then give it over to somebody to polish. But so far with the 2 that I've done, I have an editor. They put together a rough cut. I look at the rough cut. I give them feedback. One of the things that I do is I have to look at all of the footage first, because then I tell them which of the scenes that I like best, which of the takes that I like best, and so forth and so on. They take the script and they structure the film based on what the script looks like. And then we come back, and that last stage of editing is very much, I'm sitting in the room with you. We're shaving, 2 seconds here. We're adding, another piece here, we're taking that take out and putting this take in because that actually works a little bit better. So somewhat involved, but somebody else is doing all the, you know, the tech stuff.
Okay.
But I want to learn the tech stuff because I think that's something I should know.
Yeah, now is that something that most directors, they get heavily involved in after?
I feel like if they're lucky.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the things you get from people who work, you know, who are working on studio projects is that they don't have that opportunity. You know, studio producers, everybody else gets final cut.
Okay.
So they don't get to make those decisions. They get some input, but they don't get to say. I think one of the luxuries of working on the independent level and being both the producer as well, right? Because I'm the writer, director, and producer, is that I get to do that. So I'm enjoying it while I can.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
For those that are being introduced to you for the first time through this interview, how can they find your books and your short stories along with your films that are currently out?
Okay, so my name is Ellen Davis again. I am LM Davis Writes.com, and from there they can link to they can purchase my books on my website. They can link out to other places to purchase, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, that sort of thing. They can link with all of my social media. And then they can also, for my films, they can follow me at Third Rose Films. Third as in first, second, third, Rose Films on Instagram. And from there they can link to my film Fever Dreams, which is available for screening on YouTube. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Davis, for gracing us with your presence this morning.
Oh,
Appreciate
well,
it.
thank you for having me.
So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will.
If this the land of the free, was a freedom then, when they annexed Hawaii and called it Cedar Lands, without any type of payment and no signing off, called themselves the Republic in 1894. 1.2 million acres overtaken from the native Hawaiians. When they resisted, the West retaliated in violence and erasure. The Hawaiian language is banned as part of colonialism's plan to expand, yeah.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. The work of all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will.
So if we put Hawaii into perspective, well, Black and Asian history is interconnected. Considering the fight with the Pacific, then of course versus Asia, they was treated as a middleman for war, but didn't let the Western colorism run its course. Cause dark skin was a sign of dignity to core. The land was taken in the name of capitalism, when prior to it was an actual kingdom. Clap back at the system.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place. Multiple bombings of Kaho'olawe as a part of their ongoing war with Asia. Used it as a place for target practice. No consent or compensation. Colonizers call for annexation. The work of all the locals. School will never let you know. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. So many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. Too many stories left to tell, even if we have to ourselves. Can't keep history on the shelf. If we won't tell it, we will. We will.